I made it back from vacation. It was not super long. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Just a quick little 4-day deal. I know that's pretty reasonably timed out. But that's sort of what the season called for a number of reasons. It was a lot of fun. It was easy by all accounts. Family and I, we just got in the car. I mean, we obviously packed and rolled south. San Diego way. Did a Padres game, did some beaches, did the San Diego Zoo, did Legoland on the way back, and now it's time to settle back in. And timing couldn't be better because Yahoo Leagues are set to open tomorrow. August the 8th has been the target date for Yahoo. Dan Titus told us that about a month ago, and apparently nothing has changed. So keep your eyes peeled on that. It is going to dramatically change the way we cover everything starting tomorrow. So first of all, welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm Dan Besbris. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan Besbris. You can all follow Old Man Squad at Old Man Squad. Up into the mid 800s already, which is very cool. We can get that sucker up and over 1,000 pretty soon, especially once we see basketball start to ramp up a little bit. It will also follow you back if you need another reason to follow Old Man Squad. Quickly here, before we dive into the Cavaliers, that's a topic on today's podcast. We're going to get into the Cavs and if really anything has changed year over year and how we can potentially react to that. But just a quick heads up on how we're going to be running things. If indeed Yahoo Leagues do open tomorrow, and presumably that would also mean that mock drafts open tomorrow, we're going to get those cooking right away, immediately. But we're also only on the Cavaliers, meaning we still have 3 more teams in the Central, the entire Atlantic Division. So we still have 8 teams left to cover. We're not going to be doing 2 teams a day and draft prep stuff. So what's likely to happen on the show going forward is that we're going to be attempting to do 1 team preview every day alongside some sort of more generic or broad-based or mock-based draft prep type of show. So in all likelihood, we're going to do 2 shows as often as humanly possible. When we can't do 2 shows, we'll do a draft prep show, and it's the team previews that will kind of get left behind a little bit. Because look, as exciting as it is that leagues are going to be open tomorrow, it's still only going to be August 8th. 2.5 months, basically, from the start of the NBA season. So we got time to wedge in the last 8 team previews. That's not going to be an issue. There's just so much stuff to cover. So let's get into the Cavaliers, because this is a team that changed. Look, I mean, sugarcoat it. Nothing. They really did nothing. I mean, there's little stuff, things around the edges, I guess. But for the most part, the same guys are there that were last year. There you go. Marcus Morris. Is that like one of the big changes? Damian Jones. I don't think he was there at the end of last season. All of the regulars are the same year over year. So I could very easily come on a podcast right now and just say, don't do anything differently. The end. 2.5-minute show. But I'm not going to do that because there are some questions from last year. And I feel like we need to address at least a couple of them. There were only 4 Cavaliers last season who had 9 category value per game ranked inside the top 100. There were 4 that had 8 category value per game inside the top 100. The 3 for 9 cal were Donovan Mitchell, who was a first rounder, Evan Mobley, and Jarrett Allen, who were each 4th rounders on a per game basis. The dude who wasn't inside the top 109 cat, but was an 8, is obviously Darius Garland. And then you get down to the sort of doesn't matter group of Max Strus and Karis LeVert. Let's talk about the doesn't matter guys first. We'll kind of work our way up the board of intrigue, the board d'intrigue today. And that's starting with Karis LeVert, who finished at number 128 in 9 category leagues on 14, 4, and 5 with a steal, 1.5 threes, and pretty abysmal percentages at 42 and 77. Only 1.7 turnovers, so a nice 3-to-1 ratio there. But as nice as 14, 4, and 5 with 1.6 defensive stats is, it's not enough to counterweight the damage he was doing in field goal percent and free throw percent in particular. And 14 feels decent because it's not like it's the second teen you could get into after 13. There's just something about 14 that's like, oh, it feels like an ample amount of points, but it's technically below league average, which is again a category that's sort of top heavy. And then there's a lot of dudes that are in that like 10 to 14 range. But what he's doing well for LeVert isn't really all that impressive. He's been the poster child for many, many years of someone that can do some fun stuff in reality, but for fantasy, it just has never really translated, largely because the percentages have been awful. I would also point out, and don't worry, we'll get to Garland and Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley, but the Cavs were extraordinarily beat up last year. So Caris LeVert playing 29 minutes wasn't really part of the plan on day one. It became the plan when no one else could stay on the floor for 3/4 of a season. If we handicap the Cavaliers, and I think we kind of have to do this with all teams, frankly, with, the exception of a team that has like Joel Embiid or Kyrie Irving or Kawhi Leonard or something like that, you kind of have to handicap a team as if all of the guys are healthy. And I get it, Donovan Mitchell hasn't been in a while, but it's not like he's an old goat. Donovan, I believe, is only 27 or 28 years old right now. I think, and you guys can triple check me on this because I don't have this number in front of me, but I believe the oldest player on the Cavaliers is actually George Niang. That all the regulars there are under 30. I think Caris LeVert is the second oldest dude on the team. Like, this is not an old ball club, even though it feels like they are based on the number of games played you got last year. And Donovan Mitchell, admittedly, has had his issues with staying healthy for a couple of seasons now, but there's no reason to believe that it can't come back. It's just that it hasn't. He played 69 out of 72 games the COVID year, and it was really since then that health has gone downhill. He missed 19, 15, 14, and 27. Like, it wasn't a disaster for a couple of seasons in there, but there hasn't been a good one, really, since 2019 to 2020, when he played 69 out of their 72 ball games. And generally, prior to that, his time with the Jazz, he had been pretty healthy. But he hasn't been lately. There's no sugarcoating that. He's been amazing from a fantasy standpoint, especially since he's power boosted his steals into a wild new universe of approaching 2. And the assists are great. And the rebounds was basically a career high this last year. Like, all of the counting stuff, not points, I guess. Points were a little bit lower. But almost all of the counting stuff was best it's ever been. But 55 games for Donovan Mitchell isn't very good. But we're talking about Caris LeVert right now. The reason he even got inside the top 130 is because he had to pick up for 27 missed games of Donovan Mitchell and 25 missed games of Darius Garland. And frankly, even though it's not a direct correlation, 32 missed games from Evan Mobley. Because those are the 3 highest field goal attempt guys, excluding Caris LeVert. This is a team, by the way, that spread it around a little bit. Donovan Mitchell took 20 shots a ball game, Garland 15, LeVert 12, Mobley 11, Jared Allen just under 11, Strus just over 10. They had their guys. This was a team that had their guys, and they got the ball. But then if you pull it out and you look more at like totals in field goal attempts, you see what the Donovan Mitchell absence does. You leave those 20 shots on the table, and someone like a Caris LeVert, who was probably set to take about 10 shots per game, suddenly has to take 14. And so it balances out. That's way oversimplifying the concept. But if the Cavs, let's just frame it this way. For every quantum, some packet, however you want to classify it, for every health point the team gets, and last year they had very few, every health point, every bit of health the team gets better, LeVert's fantasy numbers get worse. So no, to answer the final question on Caris LeVert, is this a guy you want to take with your last round pick? I don't. I have no interest in it. That's not very nice. I have no interest in it being the idea of taking Caris LeVert. I have no interest in having Caris LeVert on my fantasy team because I think this was almost like a best case scenario for him. Meanwhile, okay, I always want to do like the super friend. Meanwhile, for Max Strus, who finished at 123 in 9 CAD on 12.2 points, 2.4 threes, 5 boards, 4 assists, a steal, 0.4 blocks, 42% from the field, just like LeVert, but 79, 80% of the free throw line. I don't feel that differently about Strus than I do about LeVert. Oh my God, it scared the bejesus out of my kid. Scared me half to death. This theater scared me. This is my child. He's just off camera. Do you want to step in camera? He doesn't. No, don't scare me again. Everybody watching live just saw me jump out of my chair and all the way to the ceiling. Oh my goodness. I'm going to leave that in the recorded version as well. Oh, he's going to do it again, everybody. He's going to come bursting in to frighten me again. Oh my goodness. I was not ready for that. They were so quiet coming in. Oh, I was ready this time. Come say hi. Come say hi to the camera before you play. Hi. That's Theodore. That's the guy who just scared me half to death on a podcast. You want to say hello before I continue? Woo. Yes, woo, indeed. Okay, you going to go play now? So I can finish my show? Yeah. Okay, I'll promise I'll come out and say hi as soon as I'm done. My man. That's my little dude. He's crazy. More people started watching the show while my kid was frightening me. I feel like someone please cut that moment and put it on the internet of me jumping out of my chair. He really got me. I got goosebumps. I thought, I don't know what was happening. I lost my own universe. All right, so let's talk Max Strus, because I feel somewhat similarly about Strus as I do about Caris LeVert, with a few exceptions. Number one, Strus has been at previous junctures in his career better field goal percent than this past year. Largely because of three-point shooting. He's shot 35% from downtown each of the last 2 years. He shot 41% the year before that. I don't know that we know for sure which of those numbers is the real one for Max, but we've seen enough to say it's possible it could be better. Field goal attempts for Strus didn't, believe it or not, fluctuate a ton based on who was in and who was out. And frankly, he shot better when the big guns were out there with him. Strus was a guy who actually played. He's one of those rare dudes where it was like usage wasn't perfectly equated to value, because he really did shoot better when he had people getting him open. Also, we have no idea what Max Strus's free throw percent is in his career so far, excluding the very first season where he played 2 games for Chicago. He played 39 games, low minute total in Miami. That was the year, the 2020 to 2021, the 72-game season on purpose. He shot 67% super low volume. The following year, he was at 79% on low volume. Last season, not this recent one, he was at 88%, and then he dropped back down to 79. So I don't have any idea which of those is the real one. But in the percentages, at least with Strus, there's a thing you could point at and say, look, this guy's actually done better than this in free throw percent once, in field goal percent twice, in recent history. He's not going to be a big steals or blocks guy. He got off to a strong start in steals this year, and then it kind of came back to earth the way you expected it to. But, you know, potentially repeatable. I wouldn't guarantee it, but it's potentially repeatable. The rebounds, the assists are potentially repeatable just because of the sort of situation he's in. So when I look at Strus compared to a LeVert, there's at least an opportunity to point and say, you know what, if the percentages get a little bit better and everything else stays relatively similar, he could wedge his way up towards that top 100. And there was a long stretch last year where he was hovering in the like 60 to 80 range. And that was basically when he was shooting more like 45, 46% from the field. And I don't know if that's a number that's coming back ever. But if that 3-point percent goes up by 4, 5, 6 percentage points, the 2 kind of goes with it. Because he's taking way more 3s than 2s. That is the heavy impact on his field goal percent. The other stuff we would need it to hold steady. I don't know if it will. But if you're, again, asking that same last question, which is, would I take this dude with a last round flyer? I'd be more inclined to say yes, because I think the minutes are going to be there. And if the team gets hurt again, which we can't argue that because we just said we couldn't on the LeVert side. But if the team gets hurt again, there's always that kind of hanging in the air. But for me, the Max Strus discussion is whether or not you think he can shoot 45, 46%. And I think it's in there. It's a maybe 25% chance, something like that. And then you're looking at a guy that could crawl up to that 90 range, which again, not super exciting. But if you're getting a dozen points and 2.5 threes and 5 boards and 4 assists and a steal, and you're getting it on a field goal percent that isn't breaking you, it's actually not that bad in a lot of formats. I'm going to jump over Darius Garland because I want to talk about Garland and Donovan Mitchell last. And instead, let's go straight to Jarrett Allen as the next name on the list. But before we do, and I always forget to do this, we're going to take just a quick break for a word from our sponsors through the Believe Network. Welcome back. We got Jarrett Allen, we got Evan Mobley, we got Spida and Garland left to talk about on this Cavaliers preview. And let's talk about Jarrett Allen first, because he just signed an extension, which I think was actually just sort of like right onto the back end of his existing contract already. No, is that right? Maybe. I thought. Maybe it hasn't been updated yet. In any event, he was already under contract for another year after this one. It just got retooled and they added some more stuff, which is delightful. And, the experts are saying there's still a chance that he could potentially get traded after that and blah, blah, blah. But as of the moment, he's a Cavalier for like 5 more years. Jarrett Allen was a pillar of consistency this past season. Averaged 16.5 points, 10.5 boards, 2.7 assists, 0.7 steals, 1.1 blocks, 63%, nice volume, 10.5, big field goal percent guy. Didn't really hurt your free throw percent, 74% per game. You can handle that. And obviously low turnovers as a traditional big man. He is, I believe, set to be underdrafted again this coming season, although I don't know that I'd expect production of quite this magnitude. Jarrett Allen was the big beneficiary of Evan Mobley's long injury hiatus from basketball, although he wasn't the only one, but it helped him quite a bit. And the field goal percent or field goal attempts were over 10 for the first time in his career. The rebounds were back to 10.5 after they dropped to 9.8 the prior year. The minutes were actually slightly lower this past season, although I don't think that I'd read too much into that. But the scoring was the best that Allen's ever had. The assists were the highest he's ever had. Steals and blocks were just a little bit off his normal full game production mark, but those could potentially eke back up. We're talking about just a couple over the course of the entire season. I think Jarrett Allen has another shot to be top 50. There is upside beyond that if he happens to have a year where he blocks 1.4 shots instead of 1.1. It's again a big if. But if the other stuff stays somewhat near, assuming the field goal attempts probably come back down to the low 9s, so scoring will come down a little bit. Okay, that's annoying. But if you get an uptick in defensive stats, that's just sort of the usual bouncing around of those types of categories. It's typically close, but not exactly the same every year. He could even outperform this season, and he's going to do it while getting drafted low. He's just an easy old man squad type of decision because that's what his game provides. He's a traditional big man who doesn't ruin your percentages. He's not a massive blocks dude. People are going to overlook him because he's not exciting, but he's just going to chunk along. and be super useful. I would expect he gets drafted near 55 to 65 range, and I would expect to be interested in drafting him there. What about Evan Mobley? People have kind of soured on Mobley, which surprised me because is still extraordinarily young. He's only been in the NBA for 3 seasons. But everybody was just like, he's injury prone now, or he's never going to do that next thing. So this is a weird spot for me to be in because you guys know me and rookies. I wasn't super into Evan Mobley because I knew the free throw percent was not going to be high. I know I said I've had to soften my stance on rookie big men, although his rookie season was before we had that slight pivot. He ended up with a totally fine rookie year. He was good. But then everybody was like, oh, in his second year, that would have been last season. Everybody was like, oh, yeah, he's going to take this massive step forward. And I'm like, where? He was already playing 34 minutes a game his rookie season. He wasn't getting more shots unless Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland disappeared. And in fact, he took the exact same number of field goal attempts per game season 1 as season 2. And it went down this last year, although some of that was because he was working his way back from injury, so he had those low minute games. I don't know what everybody thought was about to happen. Someone tried to convince me before his second year in the NBA that the defensive stats were about to explode. And I was like, that's just not a thing that happens. Defensive stats typically go with minutes played. He wasn't a dude who was in foul trouble all the time, so you couldn't point to the JJJ situation and say, oh, well, if he could only just last another 4 minutes on the court. No, he did fine with that, even in his rookie year. The only thing you could really point at with Mobley and say, here's the thing that could still get way better was free throw percent. And it did get a little bit better this last year. He got up to 72% at the foul line. Field goal percent actually went up to 58, which is startling. Oddly, some of that was because the 1 to 1.5 3-pointers he was attempting per game, he wasn't automatically missing them. 2-point percentage got a little bit better, not by a whole lot. So there's been these incremental, which again, much more common. We've talked about this many times on the podcast. Incremental gains in a lot of stuff. His rebounding has gotten a little bit better. His passing has gotten a little bit better. The field goal percent, the free throw percent, the 3-point, all that stuff has gotten a little bit better. But there was never this big kaboom type year because there wasn't a place for it. Mathematically, there wasn't a spot unless he turned his 66% free throw into 82 season over season. But that doesn't really happen all that often. Once in a blue moon. And then everybody wants to point at that as the thing that's just going to keep happening. But it's usually the other way. The small gains. Small gains. I think there's a chance now, even though for the last 2 seasons I've been trying to warn you all, the giant leap into the second round was unlikely, even though people were like, yeah, I'm going to take him third round because the jump is coming. I think we might finally be in a little bit of post-hype with Mobley because I think people that drafted him each of the last 2 years were like, yeah, I was hoping that things would get better. I was hoping that we'd get more out of him, even though this was always the very clear linear growth plan. But if there's additional linear growth and he stays healthy this coming season, I think you might be able to get him at an ever so slight discount. Because thinking back again to the most recent, just this year that just ended, Mobley was number 41 in 9-cat on 16 points, 9.5 boards, 3 assists, 2.3 combined defensive stats. I like that. Almost half a 3-pointer, which probably goes up a little bit. 58% from the field, solid. 72% at the free throw line, starting to get there. When you look at what incremental gains might do for Mobley, incremental gain number 1 is just having a year where he goes back to playing 33, 34 minutes a game instead of 30 to 31, which would require not having I don't want to call it catastrophic, because catastrophic leg injury is you miss the whole year. This was what's a third of a season? What adjective would we use to describe that? Hemi-catastrophic? Gnarly? I need a scale for injury length. In any event, he missed 32 games this year. It was a really bad season from that aspect, but it also artificially depressed his minute per game count. So let's say that does come back up by 10% next year. Maybe you could say a 10% bump in a lot of little things, steals, blocks, assists, rebounds, whatever. Probably not going to be standardized across all of that, but maybe field goal percent, maybe scoring goes with it. Could we finally get a year where Mobley averages close to 17 points per game, gets near 10 rebounds, 3 to 3.5 assists, 2.4 combined defensive stats on 56, 57% shooting? If you can visualize that, that's how he finally makes the third round. I think you might be able to get him in the fourth this year, though. So I like both Cavs big men as possible values this coming season. Let's talk Donovan Mitchell next. We're doing Darius Garland last because that's where he belongs. No, because I just think maybe he's the most confusing of them. Donovan Mitchell missed 27 games. We already mentioned it earlier in the podcast. He hasn't had a healthy season really since 2019, 2020. So the last 4 years in a row, I will repeat it one more time. He missed 19, 15, 14, and 27 games. 15 and 14 are not all that bad. Your team could handle that, but it's also a bad upper limit. If it was like always 13, 14, 15 games missed, and at least you could count on that, that'd be something. But those were the low numbers over the last 4 years. So it makes Donovan Mitchell kind of a difficult player to draft because you're now talking about someone who you're likely going to have to take early in the second round because his per game rank was number 8 last year on 27 points per game, 3.3 threes, 5 boards, 6 assists, 2.3 defensive stats. That's the same as Mobley we just talked about, different distribution. 46%, super high volume from the field, so he managed to minimize the negative impact there. Big positive at free throw at 87%. Turnovers at 2.8 is very palatable with someone who does as much as he does. He's not, I mean, we've seen how insane the second round gets, and now that he's put up first round numbers in a couple years in a row in Cleveland, I think people believe that's the Donovan you're going to get. The question is, what kind of discount do we get because of the injury stuff? And I'm a little worried that it's not going to be enough. And we can play the whole, like, how many games does he need to get to be an actual fantasy value? Okay, we can play a little bit of that. This last year, he missed 27 games, effectively a third of an NBA season. He was number 8 per game. He was number 31 by totals. That did not hit his ADP, which was around 17, 18 this last year. What would he have needed to get to that 17 or 18 mark? We don't have an exact count from this last year. But if you're comparing to other players that were ranked near Donovan Mitchell in per game ranking and where they ended up, Kyrie Irving played 58 games last season. That's 3 more than Donovan Mitchell. He was, by totals, ranked 4 slots higher. So about a slot per game played is what was happening in that range. It becomes harder and harder to pass people the farther up the board you get. So it's going to take more than 1 game to move 1 slot is basically what we're saying here. But another interesting example, Tyrese Halliburton, who was actually number 10. He was well behind Donovan Mitchell, believe it or not, in per game rank, just those 2 slots, but there's a pretty good gap there. He played in 69 games this last year. And Tyrese Halliburton was number 10 by totals. That was 14 more games. Or versus Kyrie Irving, it was 11 more. And that 11-game jump jumped him from number 27 to number 10. Okay. So we don't have the exact number in between those guys. Devin Booker would be about the closest we could get to an actual comparison here, but he was number 16 per game. So that doesn't give us a great comparison because he played 68 games. Donovan Mitchell doesn't need to get to 68 games to get to that top 15 to 18 totals rank. We just told you Tyrese Halliburton played in 69 games, finished at number 10. He was per game number 10, so let's assume he was a couple slots higher. 69 games would obviously put him in the first round. 58 games with Kyrie, as we just mentioned, was early third round. So the answer falls directly in between. Relatively straightforward, right? Right. But what is the exact number? We're eyeballing a little bit. But the answer is probably around 63-ish, 64, something like that. Because 68 would get him into the first round. Probably be number 9 or 10. 58, early third round. You can probably split the difference and just kind of call it a wash. So that's, again, it's imperfect math. But basically, every game played over about 63 for Donovan Mitchell becomes gravy. Do you think we can get him to 63 games this year? If so, draft him comfortably at about pick 17 or 18. If not, don't. I probably would, provided my first round pick is someone that I really trust is making it through the year. And obviously, you can't predict these things exactly. Bad things happen every once in a while, but someone that has a better track record, someone that doesn't have 4 consecutive years of missing 15 games or more, basically. Madness here. The end of summer break. One comparison that pops into my head is Donovan Mitchell versus Kawhi Leonard. They feel extraordinarily similar for this coming year. Kawhi was number 6 this past season. Sorry, he was number 7 this past season. He was 6 by totals. Either way, hair splitting. I think Kawhi is better, but I also am even more worried about his health because he had to pull out of the Olympics. We know he's trying to get healthy. Funny little side story, by the way. I saw Kawhi Leonard at Legoland. He was there. I promise you, he was at Legoland. You guys can cross-check this one. He would have been there on August the 6th, and I'm fairly certain he was hanging out with Corey Joseph and their kids. Obviously, it was not just Kawhi Leonard and Corey Joseph going to Legoland. That'd be particularly odd. But here I am, like, trying to convince my wife, hey, that guy in that weird little helicopter ride, I'm pretty sure that's Corey Joseph. And I doubt anybody's recognizing him. And then I was going to say something, and then out from around the corner walks frickin' Kawhi. I'm like, okay, well, now I'm just being a jerk. Would have been funny if I was like, aren't you Corey Joseph? And while Kawhi's standing, didn't do it. Had a wife telling me I was acting like a weirdo. So I stopped. So again, we'll get an ADP on this stuff. We'll make our call at some point on it. But basically, I'm more or less, I think we can kind of plant our flag in the notion that for Donovan Mitchell, if he's going later than about pick 15 or 16, he's probably a good choice. And if he's going earlier than that, you're playing with fire. Because there's going to be someone available earlier than that you're not just doing this dance of like, will they make it to 64 frickin' ball games? And finally, there's Darius freaking Garland, who finished at number 110. Admittedly, 9-category league. Yes, okay, fine. 8-cat, he was better because turnovers were raunchy. He jumped up to number 64 in 8-cat. And oftentimes the high turnover point guards do see a nice little bump in that stuff. But it's still way back. 9, 8-cat, whatever. He's still way back of where he was getting drafted, which was near 40. Either it was a complete disaster in 9-cat or a miniature disaster in 8-cat. So the question I think we have to pose on today's show is, can Darius Garland ever get back to what was? I fear the answer might be no. The season before Donovan Mitchell arrived in Cleveland, Darius Garland averaged 22 points, 8.5 assists. He did it on 46% shooting from the field, 89% at the free throw line, 2.6 3-pointers per game. This last year was a big step down as other dudes on the team, Max Strus, Karis LeVert, etc., they all started to just do a little bit more. Garland, lowest shot attempts since his rookie year, which, mind you, it's only a 5-year NBA career, but everything trended the wrong way. Everything, really, almost across the board. Assists were down. Steals were the same, so I guess there's that. Turnovers were up a little bit, despite the assists being down. It was bad. Shot 44.5%, after 2 seasons in a row of 46. 3-point percent was lower, down to 37. Free throw is down to 83. His career 86.5. I would offer this sort of midpoint solution on Darius Garland. The midpoint on him is, no, he's almost definitely not going to be the Darius Garland that he was before Donovan Mitchell arrived. But I also find it hard to believe that this last season of grossness is going to get replicated. That seems frightfully. I mean, anything's possible, I guess. But like, he scored 21 points a game even in Donovan's first season there. And then just everything fell off. Even if only the free throw number comes back a little bit, Garland at least goes back to some sort of value. He was number 50 last season with Donovan Mitchell around, and Mobley and Jared Allen and Karis LeVert. And yes, they added Strus. They added some shooting. They brought in those types of Strus and George Niang and all that kind of stuff. But like, I don't know that I could. It does feel like it's possible that Garland could get back up to 16 shots per game and make more of his free throws and be more of that like 50 to 65, 70 range dude. I don't think he falls. Here's the thing. As bad as he was this last year, I still don't think he falls far enough. Just because he's a point guard. He gets assists. People like points and assists. It's like you can't push him far enough down the board. And they dry out after the first 4 rounds. So even bad Darius Garland is probably still going to get drafted like 50 range, top 50 range, something like that. And to me, that's still too soon because 50 feels like almost a best case scenario for him. If a lot of stuff goes back to breaking his way, more realistically, 110 is the low mark. You're probably looking at a 9-cat rank, maybe near 70, 60 to 80, if you want to give sort of a little bit of buffer on each side. And I can't imagine he falls that far. So as much as I'd like to say that this is going to be a nice value year for Garland, I don't, because of his fantasy profile, because he scores and hits threes and gets assists, he's just never going to fall. Those guys don't. They just don't. If he stopped scoring, you'd see him fall. But, even in a bad scoring year, he was still up at 18. So people are not going to completely overlook him. If I'm totally wrong and he's going in the 60s on fantasy draft night, then I might point and say, look, if this is a guy, like if you can weather some turnovers, then he could be fine for you in there. He'd be an interesting point guard to get. But I still think he gets drafted inside the top 50 because he's young, because people are going to remember all those other years. And even if there's a little bounce back this season, I don't think it's going to be enough. And I hate to go so hard anti-turnover. I get it. Everybody punts turnovers in head-to-head. So you kind of just play the game as though they don't matter even in 9-cat. But also I think you can win that category by just not being terrible at it. And for Garland, he wasn't doing enough good to outweigh the bad this last year. If it was 8 assists instead of 6 to 3 turnovers, that's a really different thing. It's a lot of turnovers to have when the assists weren't nearly as high. All right, I think that'll probably about wrap it up for the Cavaliers. As I mentioned, going forward, we're going to be trying to do a show about drafts and a show about teams until we finish up the teams. And then it'll just be all juicy draft stuff from that point forward, depending on how long it takes. Minimum 8 shows, I guess, since we have 8 teams left to do. But starting tomorrow, if Yahoo Leagues are indeed open, we will be celebrating with all kinds of Yahoo League-related delights. We'll have more Twitter threads. Everything is about to get rolling again here in the next couple of days. That is fun. That is wonderful. I am at Dan Besbris on Twitter, at Old Man Squad. Please make sure to like, rate, and subscribe to the podcast. Many of you have been doing that as you guys slowly figure out where my new show is, which, I guess we'll be around for almost 3 months here soon. That's pretty good. No, that's not right. Or is it? Yeah. We'll come up on 3 months in the next couple of weeks. And it's about to get really fun. It's about to get really, really fun. Thanks to all of you that listened and watched over the weekend, even while I was out of town. I had that show auto drop on Monday evening. That was on the Pistons. Now we're settling in. I'm not going anywhere for a while here, probably not till the dead of winter. So let's rock and roll, lock and load, whatever expression you think best encapsulates the joy that is Yahoo League's opening. I'm hoping they will be by the time I talk to you next. Find me over on social. Drop those 5 stars, blah, blah, blah. Hugs and kisses. See you soon.